Welcome back, everyone. Today's explainer is a really fascinating one because we're essentially looking at a snapshot of history in the making. If we look at the top stories from today, July 14th, 2026, a very clear, honestly almost electric theme starts to emerge. We're seeing relentless technological innovation colliding head-on with traditional boundaries. Whether those boundaries are the physical limits of our atmosphere, the legal walls built around trade secrets, or the regulatory frameworks governing our money, well, technology is just pushing right through them. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and we're going to make these complex shifts incredibly accessible. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, space, commerce, and geopolitics. Second, the AI hardware war. Third, Siri AI's quantum leap. And finally, New Hampshire's blockchain revolution. Starting off with Section 1, Space, Commerce, and Geopolitics. Let's start right at the edge of space, because that's precisely where the friction between new economics and old terrestrial geopolitics is most visible right now. Think about the current reality with the Falcon 9. It's already an absolute engineering marvel, hitting 80% reusability by landing its first stage. That costs SpaceX about $28 million internally per launch. But Starship version 3, they are aiming for 100% reusability. By recovering and rapidly refurbishing both the booster and the upper stage, SpaceX is targeting a marginal cost of under $2 million per launch. I mean, that cost structure fundamentally alters what is financially possible in orbit. At $2 million a pop, things like massive space telescopes, orbital manufacturing, and even permanent lunar bases suddenly cross over from science fiction into economically viable ventures. But to get to that economic utopia, you really have to survive the development process first. From the total vehicle loss in Flight 1 back in April 2023, there's been this incredibly rapid iterative progression. Flight 2 nailed stage separation. By early 2024, they actually reached space. Then, all through late 2024 and early 2026, they pushed through booster recovery, orbital operations, and rigorous version 3 testing. And yes, there were anomalies, like that regenerative cooling issue on Flight 12, but they treat every single failure as a learning opportunity to just iterate faster than any competitor out there. Which brings us to Thursday. Flight 13 is the crucial transition from an experimental test program to a full-blown commercial reality. This isn't just a dummy payload anymore. Starship is carrying a $2 billion investment of fully operational Starlink V3 satellites. And the specs here are just staggering. We are talking about 1 gigabit per second download speeds and under 10 milliseconds of latency. It's creating a true space-based mesh network with laser links. For you and me, this means high-speed, lag-free connectivity no matter how remote your location is. It truly rivals terrestrial fiber optic internet. And to get this massive 150 metric tons of payload to orbit, the vehicle uses a 4mm thick stainless steel skin and new Raptor 3 engines outputting 15% more thrust. This is literally the heavy lifting of the future. But while commercial space is thriving on all this innovation, terrestrial geopolitics tells a really different story. Today, NASA astronaut Anil Menon launches to the International Space Station on a Russian Soyuz rocket. Now, you might be wondering, given all the immense geopolitical tensions right now, why is America still flying on Russian hardware? Well, it's because the cold, hard facts of spacecraft certification totally override geopolitical friction. SpaceX's Crew Dragon is incredible for sure, but it's currently limited to a 6-month docked duration because of propellant degradation. The Soyuz, on the other hand, has a 50-year operational history and is the only craft certified as a year-long emergency lifeboat. Science and safety basically mandate this cooperation, ensuring astronauts like Dr. Menon, who, by the way, actually used to be SpaceX's flight surgeon, can safely keep the aging ISS operational. So, up in space, the sheer physical danger forces international adversaries to cooperate. But what happens when we bring our focus back down to Earth? Can the law actually keep up with the speed of code and hardware? Because right now in Silicon Valley, competition isn't fostering cooperation at all. It's turning into outright legal warfare. Moving on to Section 2, the AI hardware war. Let's head over to California and see how this current situation builds on a long historical pattern. Silicon Valley has always struggled with the tension between employee mobility and protecting trade secrets. California famously doesn't allow non-competes. That fuels a ton of innovation, but it also sparks these fierce talent wars. Google and Microsoft clashed way back in 2009. Then there was the infamous Waymo versus Uber $245 million settlement in 2017 over self-driving tech. And now, in 2026, it's all culminating in a massive 127-page complaint filed by Apple against OpenAI. So the crucial point here is this massive clash between California's culture of employee mobility and the protection of billion-dollar trade secrets. Apple alleges that OpenAI is engaging in systematic knowledge extraction to build an AI hardware device known as Project Device X. They claim former Apple engineers, specifically Chang Liu and Tang Tan, transferred circuit schematics and thermal data right before leaving, and they make a big point of the fact that OpenAI has hired over 400 former Apple employees. On the flip side, OpenAI is fiercely defending its practices. They state that all their development is completely independent, pointing to mandatory NDA training for all staff. Their argument is basically that when highly skilled engineers tackle similar problems using public domain knowledge, you just naturally get design convergence. We are impartially watching this play out, but the stakes couldn't be higher here. This threatens to establish new legal precedents for the entire knowledge economy. All right, Section 3. Siri AI's Quantum Leap. So why exactly is Apple defending its hardware and AI ecosystem so intensely? Well, that becomes really obvious when we explore how Siri trades raw response speed for a revolutionary, privacy-focused screen awareness. With the iOS 27 beta, Siri has transitioned from structured lookups to a dedicated large language model. Siri now has full-screen content understanding. You can literally just look at a photo and say, "What kind of dog is this?" and it knows. It also features dynamic cross-app actions. You can order your favorite food and schedule a pickup without ever touching a button. But there is a catch. There's a 2 to 3 second latency average, compared to sub 1 second for Google and Alexa. That delay is the cost of Apple's hybrid architecture. They are prioritizing processing sensitive data right on your device's Neuro engine rather than sending everything up to the cloud. These capabilities in iOS 27 are just incredibly robust. You've got the App Intense API orchestrating multi-step tasks, a proactive screen time coach that'll actually intervene if you're doom scrolling, and a highly transparent privacy dashboard. But here is the major friction point: hardware limits. All this on-device hybrid processing requires massive computational power. As a result, the Siri AI update has a hard cutoff. It requires the A14 chip, meaning the iPhone 12 and newer. Millions of iPhone 11 users are totally excluded because their A13 chips simply lack the neural capacity. Critics are calling it planned obsolescence, while Apple points to the genuine hardware requirements of running on-device AI inference. When your phone can literally see what you see, read your personal emails, and act across your apps, we are forced to ask a pretty heavy question. How do we govern a future where the distinction between a basic software tool and an autonomous agent is completely blurred? As AI and code become increasingly decentralized and autonomous, how do our laws actually adapt to that? Which perfectly tees up Section 4, New Hampshire's blockchain revolution. To see one possible answer to that regulatory puzzle, we're heading over to New Hampshire. The state is utilizing its famous live free or die ethos to aggressively eliminate bureaucratic friction. Just yesterday, July 13th, the governor signed House Bill 639, the Blockchain Basic Laws Act. This is just a perfect example of a state acting as a laboratory of democracy. They're intentionally building a legal ecosystem to attract innovation rather than suffocating it. The law explicitly legalizes crypto mining and validation without the need for special licenses. But even more fascinating, it establishes a specialized blockchain dispute resolution docket. Instead of traditional judges trying to interpret smart contracts through the lens of outdated contract law, this system trains specialized judges specifically in blockchain tech. This bold move is immediately creating competitive pressure for other states, and potentially even the federal government, to clarify their own frameworks. But New Hampshire isn't just writing laws, they are investing on a sovereign nation level. They have officially established a strategic Bitcoin reserve of 3,250 Bitcoin. That surpasses the sovereign nation of El Salvador, and it's significantly more than Canton Zug in Switzerland holds. At an average cost basis of $61,500 per coin, New Hampshire is currently managing a $200 million strategic reserve of decentralized assets. Of course, a move like this completely breaks traditional molds, and it's igniting fierce debate. Proponents argue that traditional state investments, like treasury bonds, just lose real purchasing power to inflation over time. They view Bitcoin's fixed 21 million supply as a non-sovereign store of value and a solid inflation hedge, noting that the state's 5% allocation cap responsibly limits their risk. Skeptics, however, are pushing back hard. They argue that public funds should absolutely never be exposed to this kind of reckless volatility. They point out that a 30% price drop could wipe out $60 million of state wealth practically overnight, severely straining public services. It is a real-time, high-stakes stress test of traditional state investment strategies against entirely new asset classes. And that really brings us to the ultimate question underlying today's entire briefing. From the sheer economics of Starship in orbit to the highly secretive talent wars over AI hardware in California, to Siri acting as a literal autonomous agent on our phones, right down to New Hampshire completely rewriting the legal code for blockchain. Will traditional frameworks adapt fast enough to govern these new frontiers, or will the technology simply leave them behind? Take a moment to think about how these deeply interconnected frontiers will reshape your world tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the horizon, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to map out the future together.